Hi, everyone. This is Danelli. I am going to be talking a little bit about the cost of a master's degree program, in specific, the cost of a terminal master's degree program. I wanted to continue, the series where I kind of break down tuition and the cost of attendance for different programs that I started with the breakdown of a bachelor's degree. And I want to continue that with the master's degree and talk a little bit about, the differences between different types of programs, different types of master's programs, and why you would choose one over the other and what is the cost benefit, as well as, the overall cost of attending a master's graduate program. So first things first, I do want to talk a little bit about, the difference between a terminal master's program and a program like a PhD program that has a master's degree included. The master's terminal programs generally, are 2 years. They don't require you to necessarily write a master's thesis, though that is an option if you want to go into research with just a master's degree. But usually they offer the option of like testing out through graduate exams at the end of the 2 years and, having a master's terminal degree, which means that you really don't continue on to a PhD. And, one of the things that you have to look at for master's terminal programs is like whether the program that you're interested in perhaps is going to be useful for your current career or to help you transition into a new career. Um, what I mean by that is that oftentimes a lot of like master's terminal programs will help people that want to bridge into community college or university teaching. And so, you know, what happens is that the program itself includes like courses that are like teaching and composition and give you options to practice being a teaching assistant. They help you bridge into working at community colleges or working with students outside of a K through 12 setting. Other times, other graduate programs, for example, are great if you already have, say, like a single subject credentials. Say you're a teacher in a K through 12 and you already have a bachelor's degree and you have your K through 12 credential, but you decided that you're going to weigh the cost benefit of incurring a little bit of debt to get a graduate degree program or to a graduate degree. In the short term, you like might actually benefit from incurring the debt in order to be able to jump to the next bracket in your pay. If you are, for example, working in a K through 12 setting, a district or a particular school, a lot of times, like pay raises and jumping into the next bracket of pay requires an additional degree or additional degrees. So in the short term, incurring that kind of debt might be worth it for you and your, further goals in your career. Say, for example, you're in an industry where like a master's degree is going to help you learn skills that are required to either like interview for a higher position or to get a raise or whatnot. You want to actually look at whether ending with, a terminal master's degree is going to be beneficial for you. I'm going to use my example just for the sake of like, like sharing a little bit about what the decision process is like when you're considering a master's terminal program versus a PhD program that includes a master's degree. So again, like it depends on where you are at in your career and what you foresee yourself doing, say within 5 or 10 years. Originally, like myself, like a lot of individuals, when I went into a graduate program for a master's degree, I had already had a bachelor's degree and I worked in law for a while and I had my paralegal certificate from UCLA. But the thing is with, trying to transition into working with community college students, getting a master's degree is much more beneficial, and it really puts you out there as like a better qualified candidate for that kind of work. And even just to be a tutor or an instructional assistant. And so I really had to sit down and consider, is a terminal program better for me because I, want to work with a specific group of people, and do I see myself working, with individuals in a community college setting longer before I actually go into, say, dissertation research. And at the time when I decided to enroll in my program, for example, for me, I wanted to actually work and like work with students and teach and be a teaching assistant. So, a terminal program was perfect for me. And I decided not to take the option of like writing a master's thesis because it was just a terminal degree. And I focused a lot more on like learning pedagogy, learning teaching, how to work with certain demographics of students. The thing about a master's degree that's different with a bachelor's degree is that really when you're working on a bachelor's degree, 50% of the time you're learning how to be a Renaissance student. So you're learning a little bit of this, you're learning a little bit of that. You are taking different courses in different types of disciplines, which is absolutely normal. A lot of individuals do. It's foundational. And then you go into some graduate, like undergraduate courses, graduate courses in order to qualify for your bachelor's degree in whatever discipline you chose. Um, what I realized after a while was that I didn't actually learn as much as I thought I did, because a lot of the courses are survey courses. So imagine trying to cover like the entire history of English literature and language in like a handful of courses for a bachelor's degree. You're not going to achieve that. You're not really actually going to go in as deep in the material as, you know, you really need to. So a master's program is really useful for that because you delve in deeper into the material and you cover material that you didn't cover in a bachelor's degree program. So that's something that like you need to really consider, whether specializing a little bit deeper in that specific field in that graduate studies is what you want to do. Aside from what other practical benefits you will get career wise with getting a terminal master's program. Like I said, a lot of individuals that were already teaching in different settings decided to like weigh the cost benefit of a terminal degree, and it works because you're qualifying yourself for working with particular types of students in a particular types of setting, or you're jumping from one economic bracket to the next. And so these degrees are terminal for a reason because there is no real like further research required. You're actually going to be engaging in like practical teaching work. That being said, um, you know, uh you want to make sure you consider this ahead of time. You want to make sure that you like plan it out, map it out as much as possible because even when you plan things out, you might end up realizing that like there is a shift in either like trends or what's happening in the economy or what's happening in education. Some laws or policies might get passed, so things might end up changing. So you really want to plan and map out your career, like anywhere between 5 and 10 year, like game plan is great. For example, a lot of individuals in my situation, we had planned to teach for much longer in community college settings than we were actually giving the opportunity to, because then we got hit by COVID. And then COVID forced us to change a lot of like our original plans, and I ended up working less in a community college setting that I actually intended to originally, and I was forced to take up some work as a K through 12 substitute teacher, which also, my degrees also qualified me for. So that is something that you kind of like want to think about, is like what is your original plan, why you're going to, you know why you're returning to these programs or this program in specific, what it is that you want to extract from it, what is the benefit that you want to gain professionally from it, and what's going to be the game plan if like things change. The great thing about terminal programs is that they do prepare you for practical work. So you're already prepared to work in a community college setting, and you already like know kind of what to expect in the master's trajectory kind of program. So if you end up and do end up enrolling in a PhD program that has like um a master's qualification attached to it, sorry, for some reason some days I can't talk, um then you kind of already know that like you're bridging into pre-dissertation work with a PhD program. But I will be talking a little bit more about that in a separate video, because I do think that we need to like extract what the difference is between the two. So for a master's terminal program, like I said, you generally have the option to, take your graduate exams and then call it a day, or you can do like a master's thesis and help and, bridge yourself into like doing some research with the master's. Um, I personally feel like if you're going to end up doing a master's thesis, you should have ended up enrolling maybe in a PhD program, because a master's thesis could add one additional year to your master's degree, purely on research to do like the thesis or more. And if that's going to be the case, you might as well be enrolled in a PhD program, because if you're doing that much research for a thesis, then, you know, um, you're kind of doing the work of an additional degree without getting that degree. As it is, you still have to do additional classwork when you get into a PhD program. Um, and it's going to feel like you're doing more classroom work, like taking extra courses on top of like what you are going to have to do for research in a PhD program. So like you really want to consider whether that's going to be a good option for you or not. Um, and I want to at this point talk a little bit about like what the tuition costs really are, what goes into like these budgets, what are some of the options for housing, how it works, and realistically, like what is the financial situation that you might end up finding yourself if you decide to jump into a graduate program, and specifically a master's graduate terminal program. That being said, I'm gonna pause this really quick and then transition. All right. So what I have on the screen here, and I hope you can see it well, I took a screenshot of like the master's degree budget for or tuition breakdown for Cal State Dominguez Hills, which is my alma mater for the master's degree. And this really actually just breaks it down very neatly for you. Um, and it like maps out how they actually determine like what the budgets are for students. Um, they break it down assuming that some students still live with parents and are pretty young and like, are kind of like still relying on some kind of like help or support from relatives or family, or they just live with relatives. They have a living with parents option. They have a living on campus option, and they have living off campus option. A lot of students that go into graduate programs, I'm going to be honest with you, especially terminal master's degree programs, they're really invested in getting a degree that's going to help them transition into new line of work. So they're probably already seasoned workers to a certain degree, and they want to do practical work like in the field. So they're probably already adulting and have been for a while. So it's very unlikely that they're fully reliant on parents. A lot of them are, if they are living with relatives or parents, they're like semi-independent, and they have like their full-on adult budget. So really the living with parents, the living off campus, I think for a graduate program is often you're going to find that it's somewhere in the middle. Um, so you really have to look at like assess your situation and see like what applies for you. Um, I'm going to skip over this column of that's like specifically for undergraduates, but you can follow kind of my video on like breakdowns for a bachelor's degree and compare and contrast a little bit with what you see here. You can also access this information on the in each school's website. They should have like a clear um similar page where they break everything, all the costs down for you. And you can kind of like use my cost of a bachelor's video to help you and guide you a little bit in how to do a cost assessment for Cal State University. I'm also going to skip over the credential section. Um, this is really specifically for individuals that want to get a single subject or a multiple subject credential that want to go into working in K through 12. They have a different breakdown, but it is incredibly popular, so they tend to break it down for students and make an entire column on its own. Um, so we're going to focus on the graduate column here on the far right. And for graduate students living with relatives or living with family or living with parents that still get some support, the budget is a little bit different because they're assuming that if you're living with relatives or family that you're getting some kind of financial support. Again, that's not always the case, but this is assuming you're on the younger side and or maybe still dependent to a certain degree. Tuition is going to be a total of about 9,459. Remember, these tuitions tend to change depending on like, the year and the economy and a number of different factors. So yeah, this might end up increasing year per year. I have yet to see a decrease, but you never know. Um, and then you have your books and supplies. This section here is, in my opinion, like if you're going to do it in an English or humanities degree where there's a lot of reading, like I did, um, this sort of books and supplies budget, for me, they always seem a little bit on the lower end because realistically, 1,180 for like the books and the supplies and all the printing that you got to do and like copy photocopying and all of the like materials and books that can cost up in one book, an anthology can cost a couple $100, and some law books are also quite expensive. So this books and supplies like budget always seems a little bit small for me. um you want to keep that in mind when you're budgeting. Then you have food and housing. This is also on a like smaller budget. I think a more realistic one is down here at the bottom, 21,763. Um, Keep in mind these budgets are for like a school year. This is approximately 9 months out of the year. So you really have to budget accordingly for the full year. Is this really realistic or not? Right? Do the math for yourself, especially if you're going to be living on campus, like how much your money is actually going to stretch and whether you're going to be covered food wise and housing wise for 12 months or if this is just 9 months. You might want to start asking those questions from the various different offices on campus and see what the answer is for that. Transportation. I think these budgets assume that you don't have a car bill because they're quite small. Even if you just had to budget for parking, for gas, for emergency services to your car, for whatever. I think the transportation budgets are quite low. I would feel more comfortable having a higher budget of about $5,000 just to be realistic because you just never know. Um, Especially in very impacted areas where traffic is like very heavy, like in Southern California. This is a little bit unrealistic. And if you have a car bill, it's extremely unrealistic. You're going to be paying a lot more than this per year in transportation. Then you have your personal budgets. So 3,582. Again, this is assuming that you have very basic needs. This it depends on what career track you're on. Like if you're taking on a law degree, taking on like a specific medical degree, you might need to buy new clothing. You might need to buy like a suit or a set of suits. You may need to buy scrubs. You may need to buy other personal items that are required for different types of situations. If you're actually working, it's different than if you're interviewing for work. If you're engaging in community, work where it's more like the dress is more casual, maybe, you need to have different types of clothing for these different types of situation. This also includes like, shoes, like, materials that you're gonna need. Let's be realistic. Women require like purses and makeup and things like that. So the personal um budget here, you really have to incorporate like the female tax also for like anything that's women related. I always think these budgets don't ever take women into account. Um, they're very like I think very, very limited. Oops. And I think, let me see. All right. So personal, it's at 4,705, assuming that you're living on campus alone, 100% independent. So again, take into consideration what you would include in these sort of personal budgets. It's very unlikely, like it's very unusual for students that are enrolled in graduate programs to actually be living on campus. Depending on the campus, it might be incredibly hard to even get housing on campus as a graduate student. And it's also usually very uncommon because by the time that, students enroll in a graduate program, like I said, they tend to already be adults and working either part-time or full-time. So they're in a situation already where they are probably already have housing, or they're living alone, or they own a house. And so living on campus becomes very unpractical or impractical. And, like, so living on campus is something that's, from my experience, I never actually heard a lot of graduate students living on campus. Um, And the total budget ranges from anywhere on the, smaller end, 28,531 for a school year to 40,606. And to be honest with you, the cost of living in California is pretty high. And the more reasonable budget, it's somewhere anywhere between 34,000 and 40,000 per year. From my experience, you can get away with getting financial aid and working part-time. Working full-time might be really tough, especially if you have other responsibilities and you can't get out of school or you can't get out of work um early enough to get to school due to traffic and stuff like that. A lot of people struggle. So you really have to like decide whether you're going to continue working part-time or full-time. Full-time can become incredibly difficult, but it's doable if you have like a little bit of flexibility. Um, Classes often run, in the afternoons to late at night. I remember getting out of class like at 10:30, 10:45 at the latest, and that's at night. And a lot of the courses run those hours because a lot of people work or either full time or they work part time. A lot of people that are working in education, if they're lucky enough to work in K through 12 settings, they get off of work around 2, 3, maybe 4 in the afternoon, so they barely make it to their afternoon classes. If they're working in education in a community college or university setting, it's a very similar idea. Their schedule during the morning or during the day gets impacted. So the only time they really have for free to actually engage in work for a graduate program like attend courses is in the afternoon. So you really want to consider like what you're able to do if you're transitioning from one career to another, what is going to be realistic within the first year and a half. Um, Transitioning to a new career can be a challenge. So you really have to take into consideration that, maybe your financial stability is going to take a hit for the first year and a half as you're transitioning into like a new career, a new phase of your career. And so you want to consider like that these budgets are really they're they're meeting the bare minimum, so you want to consider whether you're able and willing to work more in order to like supplement your income. Let's be honest, like you're gonna have to hustle it. These graduate like budgets are very tight. So, a lot of people have to hustle it. In my example, in my experience, there was like a period of a year and a half where I worked every single day except Sundays. One of the writing centers was open Saturday, and I was open to working Saturdays because I really needed the extra income. And so, I was able to push my budget quite a bit higher for part of the year. But that was only because I was working nonstop at three different schools during the school year, did not take time off during the school year, and I was attending classes in the afternoon. Um, like one of my sisters joked that like I was always on vacation, but that's one of the plus sides of working in education is that most of the schools take every holiday off. So like, we really enjoy that time off because the rest of the time you have to take advantage of when school is, when the school season starts, if you're going to be working, because that is the time where you're actually making income. And summer work is not always guaranteed if you're working in education. Like I said, there are transitional periods where work can be very unstable. Um, and that's something you want to consider. Um, like how this program is going to help your transition to either the next financial bracket in like the next pay bracket, or how it's going to like benefit you career wise to the next phase of your career. I'm going to stop this share and then continue. Okay, awesome. I'm going to continue talking a little bit about like the financial aspect of attending graduate school. So, why would you choose a master's terminal program? Like I said, you need to like decide whether it's going to help you for something in particular and how you're going to extract the most like benefit from the graduate program. Generally, they're recommended for people that are working and want to continue working. Um, that being said, you're very likely to take a financial hit because the budgets are very tight and you're incurring usually higher debt in order to get into and work into the next phase of your career. Master's terminal programs generally will help bridge you and like teach you additional skills that will be useful in the future if you do decide to change your mind and go back to school to get a PhD. The difference between, say, for example, a PhD that includes a master's program, that a lot of people don't say this, but master's terminal programs are better at teaching pedagogy and teaching you composition and giving you a lot more opportunities to learn how to teach, and bridge you into actual teaching work than sometimes a PhD program. A lot of times PhD programs don't necessarily give you the same like exposure to pedagogy or like teaching philosophy. If you're lucky and you get one course, that's great, but you have a better opportunity in like a master's degree setting to to get additional training. One of the great things about like a school like Cal State Dominguez Hills, that I used their budget to do this video is that, for example, a lot of master's terminal programs, because they know that people might feel like it's not worth it, they add a lot of extra training for anybody that decides to work as a teaching assistant or instructor or a tutor in their writing centers. So they do a lot of training every single year. I believe the year or the time that I worked there, the training period was like v quite lengthy. Um, and so they really want you to be able to work in a specific field and extract benefit, like financial benefit from a graduate terminal program. And that's not necessarily the same philosophy that a PhD program will take on. So that's completely different. And I will try to do a different video for that because I think continuing the conversation with that would be really interesting. And I can say a few things about the cost of like a PhD program right now. And I think that's going to be an ongoing conversation since I'm still enrolled in a program. But yeah, so master's terminal programs, I went over the different like costs for it. You need to decide, like sometimes there are some additional fees that go into tuition that I didn't show and that don't always show. Um, like student access fees, things like that. But generally, if you like do the breakdown, it'll be about what is the website shows. And every school should have a breakdown for you like that. It should never be like a mystery. It should all be pretty clear what you're investing in. And because it's such a huge investment and you're incurring oftentimes additional debt in order to bridge into the next phase of your career or the next pay bracket, um, my recommendation is don't waste the opportunity. Attend every single class because even though there's maybe only one or two classes per week, if you weigh the cost of a course, and you decide not to attend one day, you're essentially like throwing away money. So you want to make sure you attend class every single day that you're supposed to, do the assignments you're supposed to, use all the resources on campus. I cannot emphasize that enough. Use every single resource that your tuition is covering you for. And if you're alumni, access your resources as an alumni. A lot of people don't realize that that is a hidden benefit of, continuing your education, being a graduate of a particular school, even if it's just for a certificate or, a credential or a bachelor's, being an alumni of a school does have its benefits. So really like engage those resources on campus and continue to engage them long after you graduate because that is essentially what the school is there for. Um, so you really want to make sure that you use your resources on campus and you extract the most benefit out of your program. Um, I think that was it. I had already done this video and I didn't record the audio, so I had to redo some of it. I'm pretty sure it was better the second time, surprisingly. But I think I covered most of what I wanted to say originally. I think I'm not forgetting much, but if I did and you have questions, please put them in the comment section. Send me comments, questions that I can get to in another video. I think, this is going to be an ongoing conversation because, like a lot of individuals are extremely concerned about taking sort of like this jump into higher education and the costs incurred, potentially incurred, scare a lot of individuals. So, this is going to be an ongoing conversation, especially as I like push into the practicalities of like attending a PhD program and what are the benefits of that. Um, and Yeah, so that's gonna be for another video. Thanks so much for sticking, with me through this video regarding the master's degree programs, terminal programs, or what the cost is, what the budget looks like, and kind of like what you should be thinking about if you are deciding that you might want to jump into a master's terminal program. Thanks so much. I will see you next time. Bye.